One factory in Taiwan controls 90% of the chips powering your phone, your car, your country's weapons. If that supply breaks, your life changes in 90 days. Here's exactly how. But here's what most people don't realize. The US government already knows this, and their entire Asia policy is now dictated by one factory's survival. We can't replicate it, can't replace it, can't survive without it. While Trump obsesses over Greenland's rare earths, the real single point of failure sits 7,000 miles away in Taiwan. The system wasn't designed for resilience, it was designed for catastrophic failure. The monopoly nobody talks about. Here's a question nobody in Washington wants to answer. Who controls the chips that power every fighter jet, every iPhone, every AI system on Earth? One company controls 92% of the world's most advanced chips, the sub-7 nanometer processors that power everything from AI to weapon systems. TSMC doesn't just dominate the cutting edge, they own 100% of 3 nanometer production, the most advanced node in existence. But here's what most people miss. TSMC doesn't just own the chips themselves. They control advanced packaging, the technology that combines logic dies with memory for AI accelerators. They've doubled capacity to 120,000 wafers monthly, and demand still exceeds supply. That's the real choke point. Think Intel and Samsung can compete? They trail by 2 to 3 full generations and can't replicate TSMC's EUV lithography at scale. Look at the production numbers. TSMC's advanced node capacity is roughly 4 times larger than Intel's, a gap that took decades to build and represents a manufacturing chasm, not just a competitive advantage. The replacement timeline, building equivalent fabs, takes 5 to 7 years, minimum, $20 to $40 billion per facility. You've probably heard about America's big domestic chip comeback. The Arizona fab, billions in investment, new American manufacturing. So here's the question, how much of the problem does it actually solve? The Arizona fab everyone celebrates won't hit volume production until 2025 or 2026. Even then, it produces only 20,000 wafers monthly, a rounding error compared to Taiwan's output. What about China? They're spending billions to catch up. The truth, China's most advanced domestic chips are stuck at 14 nanometers, 4 generations behind TSMC. They're trying to leapfrog with massive state investment, but the learning curve is brutal. Even with stolen blueprints and unlimited funding, achieving TSMC's yield rates takes years of iteration. Both superpowers are trapped in dependence on Taiwan. This wasn't an accident. They designed this system deliberately. Moore's Law economics pushed all cutting-edge production to one player. The only way to afford $20 billion fabs was radical concentration. During peaceful globalization, efficiency trumped resilience every time. The geopolitical miscalculation. The US assumed Taiwan would always be stable, China would always be contained, and supply chains would never weaponize. Now we're locked into dependence with no exit strategy. This concentration isn't just a vulnerability. It creates 3 cascading failure points the moment Taiwan's supply disrupts. Let's walk through exactly how the collapse unfolds, sector by sector. The trillion-dollar collapse sequence. This concentration isn't just a vulnerability. It creates 3 cascading failure points the moment Taiwan's supply disrupts. Let's walk through exactly how the collapse unfolds, sector by sector. What happens when the US military runs out of chips? F-35 fighter jets require over 2,000 advanced chips per aircraft. No TSMC means no new production. Javelin missiles, Patriot systems, satellite networks, all use Taiwan-made processors. The Pentagon has a 90-day chip inventory for most systems. After that, weapons production freezes. Can't they just use older chips? Yes, but replacement chips from inferior nodes degrade performance by 40 to 60%. Longer targeting times, reduced range, compromised capabilities. The strategic bind nobody admits. US military capability now depends on Taiwan's manufacturing capacity. Remember the 2021 chip shortage? That was minor. Here's what a real disruption looks like. The auto industry shuts down first. Modern vehicles need 1,200 plus chips. No substitutes exist for powertrain controllers. The 2021 shortage cost automakers $210 billion and spiked used car prices 40%. and that was just a supply hiccup. Consumer electronics come next. iPhones, gaming consoles, laptops, all use TSMC chips exclusively for processors. Then appliance and industrial equipment. Chips power everything from washing machines to factory robotics. AI demand alone is doubling every 3 months. TSMC's chairman confirmed this. The growth is exponential, not linear. That means the moment supply disrupts, you don't just have a shortage. You have exponentially growing demand slamming into zero supply. The inflation mechanism, when supply of essential goods collapses, prices don't just rise, they explode. Can't the Fed just fix this? No, they can't print chips, can't lower rates enough to matter when physical goods vanish. Rate cuts don't manufacture semiconductors. This isn't a monetary problem, it's a production crisis with no monetary solution. How does a chip shortage become a market crash? Tech sector wipeout happens overnight. Apple, Nvidia, AMD, Qualcomm lose 60 to 80% of their revenue capability. These 5 companies alone represent $8 trillion in market cap, comparable to the entire US GDP. The cascade effect spreads immediately. Cloud providers like AWS, Azure, and Google can't expand capacity. AI development freezes. Data centers can't upgrade. The entire digital infrastructure stops growing. You remember 2008. The financial system nearly collapsed. Trillions evaporated. Here's what most people don't realize. A chip crisis would be worse. Significantly worse. Think 2008 was bad? That financial crisis wiped out $10 trillion. A chip crisis affects $25+ trillion in dependent sectors. Manufacturing, transportation, healthcare, defense, communications, all grinding to a halt simultaneously. No bailout is possible. The government can't manufacture chips. Expertise takes decades to build. Can't replace Taiwan's 75,000 specialized engineers. Can't write a check big enough to solve a physical production bottleneck. Money doesn't create factories or expertise. It just creates inflation, while goods disappear. The timeline to collapse, 60 to 90 days from disruption to mass production shutdowns across industries. The US government knows this, which is why their entire Asia policy is now dictated by one factory's survival. Every military deployment, every diplomatic statement, every trade negotiation in the Pacific, calculated around keeping TSMC operational. The Silicon Shield protects Taiwan better than any treaty, but it makes blockades, earthquakes, or accidents equally catastrophic. We're not dealing with traditional geopolitical leverage anymore. We're dealing with economic hostage-taking at a scale never seen before. One earthquake in the wrong place. One military miscalculation in the Taiwan Strait. One supply disruption lasting longer than 3 months. Any of these triggers the cascade. The system wasn't built for this level of fragility. It was built for efficiency during an era when we assumed peace was permanent and supply chains were neutral. We optimized for cost and speed. We eliminated redundancy. We concentrated production in the most efficient location. Now that efficiency has become our greatest vulnerability, and there's no quick way out. The powerless superpower. What happens when the world's superpower becomes a hostage? Every US military and diplomatic move in Asia is now calculated around TSMC's safety. The Silicon Shield makes Taiwan valuable enough that invasion seems unlikely, but a blockade achieves the same result. So does an earthquake. So does a targeted accident. Can't the US just rebuild domestic capacity? Look at the math. The CHIPS Act sounds impressive. $52 billion to rebuild American chip making. Here's why it's nowhere near enough. Here's the concentration risk nobody talks about. Nearly half of TSMC's revenue comes from AI and high-performance computing. And 76% of that revenue flows from North America, US hyperscalers and chip designers. If Taiwan's supply disrupts, the US doesn't just lose chips, it loses the majority of global AI infrastructure capacity. Building capacity equivalent to TSMC requires $500 billion minimum, and a decade of construction and iteration. The talent gap makes it worse. TSMC employs 75,000 specialized engineers with decades of institutional knowledge. The US has maybe 5,000 with equivalent expertise. The learning curve is brutal. Even with complete blueprints and unlimited funding, achieving TSMC's yield rates, 90% or higher on 3 nanometer nodes. Takes years of trial and error. Intel has been trying for a decade. They're still 2 generations behind. You can't shortcut the physics, can't rush the process refinement. We're not rebuilding independence, we're buying time while remaining dependent. Here's what most geopolitical analysis gets wrong about China's play. Everyone assumes the endgame is invasion, military occupation, control of the island. But what if I told you China doesn't need to invade Taiwan to win? Making chip supply uncertain enough would crater Western economies without requiring invasion. Blockade threats work. Military exercises in the Taiwan Strait work. Supply disruptions work. The leverage isn't occupation, it's economic control through uncertainty. Where does this hit your portfolio? And more importantly, how do you position yourself before institutional money figures it out? Immediate exposure hits auto manufacturers, consumer electronics companies, data centers, anything requiring continuous chip supply for production. Secondary exposure spreads to anything requiring new equipment. Factories can't upgrade machinery, hospitals can't buy new imaging systems. Infrastructure projects stall when industrial equipment becomes unavailable. Defensive positions offer limited protection. Older node chip makers survive because they're not dependent on TSMC. They can source from Samsung or Intel's legacy capacity. Commodity producers benefit when manufactured goods become scarce and prices spike. But here's the catch. These are hedges against the crisis, not solutions to it. You're not avoiding the impact. You're just positioned to profit from it. You don't need to wait for a crisis. The supply chain is already signaling stress. Lead times for advanced chips have extended significantly beyond historical norms. TSMC customers face allocation constraints and alternatives at the cutting edge remain limited. Institutional money is already pricing in this risk. Here's how to read the signals before the headlines catch up. Watch for Taiwan Strait military exercises intensifying. Watch for TSMC announcing production delays or yield issues. Watch for major tech companies suddenly stockpiling inventory. That's the signal they see disruption coming. Watch insurance rates for Taiwan shipping routes. When those spike, institutional money is pricing in real risk. The forbidden truth. U.S. foreign policy is no longer driven by ideology or alliances. It's driven by the need to protect a single factory complex. This isn't about democracy versus authoritarianism. It's about economic survival. The system was designed for efficiency during peace. Now we're trapped in fragility during tension. The real Greenland. Trump wants Greenland for rare earths worth $2 to $4 trillion, a resource play for future leverage. Taiwan's chips are worth more and we can't take them. Worse, we're already dependent on them. Can't replicate it. Can't survive without it. Greenland is optional. Taiwan is existential. The chip war isn't coming. We're already losing it by design. But here's what separates you from everyone else. You understand the timeline. You see the signals. You know what moves before the headlines catch up. This isn't about predicting the future. It's about recognizing what's already happening and positioning yourself before the crowd does. Watch the timing indicators. Understand your sector exposure. Read the supply chain warnings. Most people will react when the crisis hits. You'll see it coming.